Joyce Russell is the head of Adecco, which if you haven't heard of Adecco, the head of North American operations for Adecco, and if you haven't heard of it, it is the 8th largest employer in the world. There's times when it's been the 3rd largest employer in the world. The company operates, we're not allowed to use the word temp workers anymore, but flexible workers. And Joyce is important, particularly because I think this is where the economy is going, kind of dating employees rather than marrying them. Shriti Vadera, Baroness Vadera, she was essentially the finance minister for Gordon Brown. She was really the top-ranking financial woman in the UK government at the time. Since then, she's gone on to advise, I don't know if you're a country in trouble, a sovereign fund in trouble, or a company, a worldwide company, you turn to Shriti for advice. She's on the board of the largest mining company in the world. She's on the board of AstraZeneca. She is an advisor to Eurozone countries behind the scenes, a work that she can talk generally about, but generally not specifically. So welcome to both of you. You both have your finger on the pulse of what's going on. Let me start with you, Joyce. What are you seeing in your company in terms of, I mean, your company is sort of at the center of where things are going. What are you seeing?
So we're seeing a lot of positive news right now, Nina. Since 2009, our sector has grown 950,000 jobs. And I looked this morning at the numbers with Adecco worldwide, and we're up to 675,000 flexible contingent workers. And the really great news about that is that many of those workers are turning into full-time employees at that company. And just like you said earlier, it's a little bit about dating before you get married or trying before you buy. And they're looking at the soft skills and the hard skills, and I will talk a little bit more about that. But I, like Warren, think the economy is moving up, especially around the job sector, and very positive news from Adecco.
But you also are really at the forefront of seeing how companies are under pressure to keep those headcounts down. You said to me, you have to prove every day that you've earned this job if you're an employee?
Yeah, I really feel like you've got to earn the right to be at that company each and every day.
That's a pretty scary thing to tell, you know, whether it's your 50-year-old or your kid coming out of college.
I think you have to add that value, and you and I talked a little bit about it in Davos, is when I think you're with a company right now, you've got to put a cherry on top. You've got to add that extra value. And I tell this funny story, but we talk about there are 5 frogs in a log, and one decides to jump. How many frogs in a log? And the answer is 5, because deciding and actually doing something are 2 completely different things.
Wow.
And you got to hire the doers right now. I look around the room, and I'm so pleased to be in the room with all of you, and you're all the doers, and we've got to find those doers.
But what about the people? Not everybody's going to be a doer with a capital D. And you know, what about younger people who want to balance? You know, they're focused more on work-life balance than a lot of our generation. I mean, what about that? They have to change their MO?
Well, I think they have to be doers. I really feel passionate about that. I think we're all in this marathon of life. And one thing I love about this generation, and I do believe that she who owns this generation will own the market. And I believe that the balance that they want to have is good for us. I think the balance in working out or ultimate frisbee or kickball is good because that makes a healthier workforce for us all. And I love that they want to give back, that we somehow have created this generation of people that want to give back. And so I like that part of the balance that they want. But I do think you've got to be a doer to be successful.
And you know, we've got the serious unemployment problems in this country, and I'm going to turn to Europe too with Shriti, but first just kind of looking at this country and even more broadly, that we've got a continued high unemployment rate. We've got a labor participation rate that's historically low, meaning a lot of people are just sitting at home. They're not even joining the workforce. And then Shriti mentioned to me this, to me, a really scary number that came out from the OECD last week. Talk about that, about skills.
Yeah, I think one of the big worries that I have about the United States, which frankly I don't worry about the United States as much as anywhere else in the world. I think you're doing great, unless you blow it in the next couple of days. But, but one of the things is around skills, and there's an enormous mismatch in skills. And the United States is one of the 2 or 3 countries, I hate to say it, the United Kingdom is the other one, where the skills level of older people is still higher than the skills level of younger people coming into the market. So
that's astonishing. The skills level of adults is higher than the kids coming up.
Yeah, that means in relative terms, the United States, United Kingdom, their skills levels are declining relative to other countries. And by the way, it's a very competitive global market, and you're going to be competing based on the innovation ability and the skills ability of your, skills and abilities of your people. Youth unemployment in the United States worries me. It's double that of adults. And they have lower numeracy skills. I mean, basic. 1 in 3 people have very basic numeracy skills in the United States. It means they can't add, essentially. And if you're applying new technologies or trying to bring innovation into your companies, it's really hard to roll that out if you don't have people who have basic skills.
And let's talk about Europe. Massive unemployment, youth unemployment there.
Yeah, I mean, in Greece, 2 out of 3 young workers can't get jobs. In Spain, that's 1 out of 2. This is youth unemployment for me is a pretty global phenomenon. Whether you're looking at the Arab Spring, or South Africa, or Greece and Spain, or the United States, I feel like we're going to be the one generation the first generation to not bequeath a better life necessarily to the next one, and possibly just bequeath them with a lot of debt. So, and I do think that a lot of that is around skills. There are jobs, entry-level jobs, but we're churning out kids who don't have the skills to undertake those jobs. And the other thing that worries me about youth unemployment is if you leave somebody out of a job, out of training, or out of education for longer than a year, all of the surveys, all of the research shows they're going to be less productive for all of the rest of their life. They will never catch up. And if you think about what we're doing to huge numbers of that, what does that mean to the economy? You just aggregate that and you realize that you're permanently putting a number, a depression on that on the economy, because you've got all of those people who are not living up to their potential.
I think also, Nina, is just around the soft skills. They're so important. We look at the EQ and the IQ and the balance of that in a fit and a match. And some of the soft skills that we're really looking at.
Describe soft skills versus.
So soft skills to me are, I think about like C's in a diamond. They're the C's to me. They're communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and I think Warren said it best this morning, is that secret sauce, which is creativity or that innovation. So I think those are really, really important. And I heard a Chinese proverb last week and I loved it. It said, if you look at prosperity for a year, then you need to grow grain. If you look at prosperity for 10 years, then you need to grow trees. But if you look at prosperity for 100 years or a lifetime, then you would grow people. And I think we need to continue to grow our people.
But going back to this, this question of using, fewer full-time equivalents, do you see that as a long-term trend that companies are not going to be? And by the way, I would love to hear from all of you. Start putting hands up, your own experiences as well as questions. So I'll turn to you in just a minute, but go ahead.
Okay, so I think that trend is going to continue. It's a very high-level conversation right now. It used to be just an HR conversation, or it might be a procurement conversation. Those spends are in the millions and in the billions now in flexible labor. At one of our automotive plants that we supply here in the U.S., there are 2,700 flexible workers working in that plant that work full-time with Adecco on loan to that client company. And all of those temporary associates have benefits with Adecco.
So you provide health benefits and all of that through Adecco. Yeah,
we do.
So it's, in some ways, is it good for the employees to work like this? It's more flexible. There's less certainty.
No, it's a great thing. So my second child, Coleman, graduated in May from Carolina, came home, mother who's a job person and didn't have a job. And so
Right.
he took a temporary job or flexible job with the second largest energy company in the world, worked there 11 weeks and converted to full time. So that company took a look at Coleman, and Coleman took a look at that company, not only from the hard skills, but the soft skills. And they're both super happy with that match now. So I think we're in the match.
And he's full-time. He went from
full time now. And I don't see that trend changing.
Input and questions?
How many people are going to hire? How many
Yeah.
people are hiring right now? Put your hands up. Look at the hands.
That's amazing.
That's
How many? Can I ask you how many of you are using flexible employees more, like relying on that as opposed to full-time employees? Interesting. What about the skills gap? I mean, I always go back to this. You know, in the U.S., Bureau of Labor Statistics has 3 million unfilled jobs a month.
Yeah.
Microsoft has 6,000 jobs that they say they can't find employees for. And these are just with an undergraduate degree in computer science. And a lot of it is, of course, driving high-tech companies to say we want to hire more foreign workers, which plays into the immigration argument. I would argue, why is it that there isn't more of an effort on the part of companies to train or to partner with community colleges to train American workers for these jobs? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that you can't expect, the public sector or the educational nonprofit sector to manage to fill that skills gap on its own. It's absolutely essential to have the employer participate, not just to make sure that it's the right things that are being taught, but in fact, the best learning is on the job. And if you look at the total stock of people at work and the fact that they have to be continually reskilled, they're already at work. The only place for them to learn something different is at work. So it does need employer participation. And if there isn't employer participation, you end up with the mismatch that you're talking about. So the problem is, in particular, I have a slight issue around the sort of the rebranded flexi workers, that unless it's just a way of recruiting, it's a great way of recruiting if you want to try somebody out and it works on both sides. But if it becomes a permanent sort of feature of the market that you really only have temporary workers, you're just not going to invest in their skills. Well, why should you? Because they're going to be leaving. And in the same way, there's a mismatch with, people churn over their jobs very quickly. Why would you invest in it? So I think that there are a lot of costs in doing it in a flexible way. I'm not saying you should have a rigid system like Europe. I mean, heaven forbid. I mean, that's exactly why they have a problem. You wouldn't have had that show of hands, by the way. If this was in Europe, I mean, it would have been embarrassing.
And you describe that sentence you have about what's going on with job protectors versus in Europe.
Yes, and in Europe, the tragedy is that it's a dual market. If you have a job, you have enormous protections. Actually, the Portuguese have what I consider a communist constitution that essentially says if you have a job, it's protected for life. And right now, the government has taken its budget to court for the court to approve it because they wish to lay off public sector workers who've been redundant for a year, who they've retrained, and they can't put back in a decent job because they haven't retrained properly. They don't have, even after a year. And they want to make them redundant, and that's illegal because apparently an employee has a right to, quote, employment stability. So you can't create jobs in Portugal now. Is that a surprise?
That's not in our Bill of Rights.
Sorry?
That's not in our Bill of Rights. Should we add employment stability in our Bill of Rights here?
But that
yeah.
rigidity means that if you're in a job, you're protected. And if you're not in a job, well, we just want to keep you out of the market because otherwise you're going to be taking my job. So you end up with young people, new entrants not getting jobs, and the ones that are in jobs protected, and then you don't create new jobs.
If you want to become a taxi driver
exactly.
And where, in Italy or
if
Greece?
you want to be a surveyor in Italy, you better make sure that you've been in a surveyor's family for at least 3 centuries. If you want to own and run a taxi, you need a license, and actually you can't afford to buy one. So in fact, only if your grandfather had one. If you're a pharmacist, there are restrictions on the numbers of people an absolute restriction on the numbers of pharmacists you can have. And when they tried to lift that, the pharmacists were on the street kind of striking.
And that that's got to feed the youth unemployment and the unemployment
Yeah.
among immigrants because they don't have this centuries long. And you actually, as a very free market person, you think that the governments of Europe should engage in just training, educating young people just to keep them in the system.
I'm afraid to say I believe that in the United States as well. I mean, this country does not have a comprehensive skills and labor plan, and you cannot leave it to the market because this is not a market. These are people, they're making decisions kind of 10 or 15 years before they have to get into, before their kids have to get into the workplace. So that does not work as a market. There are a lot of social and economic factors that get into whether your own parents were sufficiently educated. So this is not a market that works perfectly. You can't just expect a perfect match of supply and demand. There has to be intervention. There are three models in the world. There's the Anglo-Saxon model, epitomized by the United States, very little social protection in relative terms, but very low unemployment because people are motivated, they have get up and go. And then you have the European model where everything is protected, very high unemployment. Mm-hmm. And there's a sort of in-between Nordic model, which has very active labor market policies, kind of interventionist, active labor market policies, but a kind of medium light protection. It's an insurance system rather than sort of social protection, and that seems to work the best. And
So is there one country that's the model of that?
Well, you have Sweden, Finland. I mean, Finland has low unemployment and the highest level of skills in the world. If you're Finnish or you're Dutch and you've just only a school leaver, you could compete with a US graduate.
And Germany is surprising in its job picture. Describe that.
I mean, Germany is an interesting place because everybody has this image of, everybody's an engineer, they churn out the best cars. But they are a low wages competitor. They have lower wages than almost the rest of Europe. All of the jobs they've created, they've got very low unemployment. But all of the jobs that they've created in recent years have been low-skilled jobs. And now Merkel is actually trying to form a government today as we speak. And the big row between her and her coalition partners is there going to be a minimum wage because people are fed up with competing on low wages. And it's a high-tech country competing on low wages.
Do you, Joyce, let me go back to, on the flex worker front, what's the impact on loyalty both ways between a company and an employee?
So the loyalty from the temporary worker?
Yeah. I mean,
contractor?
doesn't it make workers less loyal and companies less loyal to companies?
So they work for us.
Yeah.
So they're loyal to Adecco on loan
interesting.
to that client company.
Right.
So we build the loyalty with that associate and that colleague. And then they're just on loan to the different client companies. So we want that brand loyalty to us. And then they're just on loan. And if someone wants them, that's the highest compliment they can pay us. And we transition them over.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. Our time is up. We just started, barely got into it, but I really appreciate it. Good luck to both of you.
Thank you so much. Great to see you.
Thank you so much.